part 4 of our Advent series. Today we're looking at intelligence and order. And I'll just go through this again quickly, what the wreath and candles all represent here. We have a wreath which is a complete circle, no beginning, no end. It represents God, the eternal, that is present, always present, and we are drawing upon that presence all the time. It's the very explanation of our existence, the very essence of our being. The white candle in the center represents, in religious terms, we call it the Christ, and we're not referring to Jesus, we're referring to that level of consciousness that Jesus expressed. It's Jesus the Christ, one that we acknowledge as attaining full oneness with that spiritual dimension that is within every one of us. As Paul said, Christ in you, your hope of glory. Not just Christ in Jesus. So we need to make that distinction, to also recall that he said, the things I do, you can do also, and greater things, because I go to the Father. And the Father really is this inner Christ dimension. It's our source. It's the soul. It's our center of power. So we're lighting a series of 4 candles. All 4 of these represent different aspects of God. And we say God is life. That was the first week, represented by the green candle. God is love, represented by the red candle. And these express, life expresses as enthusiasm, love expresses through us as understanding. Last week we talked about power, the blue candle that expresses through us as strength. We think of God as power. And today we're looking at intelligence, which expresses as order. And we see this expressed in all kinds of ways. If you look at a bird nest, for example, or anything in nature, you'll see there's an order to how it works. There's seasons, there are times when things will work in terms of growth and times when they will not. So this is important to us, because if our life feels like it's out of order, we don't say, God, please give me more order, give me more intelligence. We affirm that the intelligence of God is active in us now, and that order is now being expressed. Whatsoever you ask for in prayer, believe that you've received it. That's the whole thing, is acknowledging that that which we are asking for is here, and our asking opens our mind to an expression of that. So if your life is a mess, start saying, my life is in divine order. And that doesn't mean you look at your mess and say, isn't this wonderful? It means you look at the mess, but you see beyond it. That there is an order working through this, through the chaos. That's the whole creation story of the first chapter in Genesis. Is in the beginning there was just chaos. God said, let there be light. And light is really that, let there be intelligence. It's let there be means to acknowledge that it's present. So we're not creating anything here. We're not saying, God, give me more intelligence. We're affirming or acknowledging that we're immersed in all of the intelligence there is. But we may have been sitting in the midst of this sea of intelligence saying, I don't know what to do. I don't have the ability to figure this out. That's also an affirmation. But it's an affirmation that shuts us down. Because when you say, I don't know what to do, you're making a statement that you're considering true. What if instead you would say, I know what to do and I do it, even if you don't? I know what to do and I do it. You open a door that is not open otherwise. Because when you say, I don't know what to do, the universe says, great, make sure that all works out just like you're seeing it. And it usually does. So that's kind of what where we're at with this whole idea. And just as a graphic, a visualization, a way to think of this, think of God as energy. Not an old man up in the sky. You can think of that if you want, but you probably won't be happy here if you do. To think of God as the pure white light of all of these four elements: life, love, power, intelligence. Think of that in the same way that we're told about and can demonstrate for ourselves. White sunlight contains all of the full spectrum, contains in the sense of God these four elements. But it takes a prism, or it takes a soul, to actually break that down and express it, to express intelligence, to express life, to express love, to express power. But we're acknowledging there's only one source of these, and that we express this rainbow of color of life, love, power, and intelligence in different ways in our life. I've described this or explained this as thinking of the artist that is given the palette of all the different colors, and you take 10 artists, give them the same paint on their own individual palette, and say paint a picture of a mountain or paint a horse or something. You think they're all going to use those elements in the same way and produce exactly the same? What is a horse in the mind of an artist? Everybody has an idea, and we express that in different ways. And which one is right? If we ask 10 artists to paint a horse and we look at the 10 paintings, probably we'll be able to tell each one of them is a horse, but a completely different interpretation. So God is not saying, here's the horse you need to paint. Here's how it's got to look to be perfect, to be right. God is just furnishing the paint. And you and I are the artists, and we are painting our life. We're expressing these qualities. We're drawing upon this palette. And we are creating a work that is either a mess or a masterpiece. And we probably experience both. We probably have gone the full gamut. But that's an important mindset to have, is God is not saying, here's how you must do this. And actually, we've been told that that's how God thinks. So we must embrace a certain set of religious ideas in order to be correct. But what religion is God? What religion is space? What religion is mathematics? What religion is law? Natural law. It doesn't matter what religion you are. If you're a mathematician, you follow certain guidelines, you follow certain rules. And how do you apply mathematics? There's not a set way. You can apply it any way you want. I'm very restricted in how I apply it. Usually I apply it with a calculator. But it is universal, and it doesn't require a certain belief system. It requires following the principles of mathematics. So we have one person that is expressing poverty and total failure in every aspect of life, and another person that is expressing success and is content with life and is doing well on all levels. So we could say that God is withholding from one person, or we could say that person may have a few smudges on their prism, that maybe they're not looking at themselves and looking at God in harmony. Or maybe they're trying to live up to something they could never live up to because they never understood that God doesn't have that in mind, that there's another way to express. There are people maybe that feel like failures because they never lived up to their father or mother's expectations. It's an important journey for us to take, to ask our own questions. I was reading some of the early life of the Fillmores over the last week, the story of unity, which I would highly recommend that you, if you have that in your library, to dust it off and get it out and look at the early days of unity, because they struggled through this. They were developing a philosophy, an internally based philosophy, the principles of which are found in all of the world's religions, but their work was to kind of boil them down into a system of thought that we know today as unity. But it's based on universal principles. They were eclectic. They drew from all sources. And that's what we want to be able to do. If we're having problems on a regular basis in our lives, as Freud says, if something negative is occurring with monotonous regularity, that we're probably adhering to something that we learned at some point that is not true. Something we think is true that is simply not. And a lot of the religious beliefs that we hold, and I'm saying religious rather than spiritual, because spiritual to me is organic. That's the process we're really involved in. We're looking at the difference between a religious system we were given. Here's how to think. Here's how to look at God. Here's what sin means. Here's what salvation means. And so you must live up to these things in order to be free, to ultimately be saved. And so if you're laboring under that and you think that you've sinned, you think you've gone so far out there that there's no return, or that I just couldn't be forgiven, you're not thinking like God thinks. You're thinking like man thinks. You're thinking like a religious system thinks. And the reason most religious systems, I think the way they do is for control. To control the way you think, to adhere to what they think. And I was thinking about this with the whole Advent thing. Why do we take a topic like Advent, which is originally intended to kind of look for something in the future to come and save us? Why do we have to do that? Why do we have to lock our minds into that whole concept? I don't believe that. I don't believe that Jesus or anybody else is going to come someday in the future and make my life better. I've actually demonstrated for myself that if my life is to be better, that I can actually play a pretty major role in making it better through the choices that I make, through the understanding I have. It's a real freeing aspect to realize we're not bound by religious doctrine. We are working with spiritual universal principle, and we're either in harmony with that or we're not. If we're not, it shows up as negative conditions in our life. If we're in harmony with it, it shows up as positive conditions. So when you think about that, you think about principle. If your life is if you're expressing negativity in your life, you're not succeeding. And you think of principle, how does this work? Do I ask principle to change or to forgive me, or do I simply say, how do I get back in tune with the way things work? And the way back home is to, as the prodigal son found when he was in the far country, the change occurred when it says, he came to himself. He came to himself. And that really means that you come to yourself, you're coming to that interconnection between yourself, the personal, and the universal, your source, God. You come to that and you begin to understand how it works. And you say, my thinking actually puts smudges on my prism if my thinking is negative. If my thinking is, I'm being punished. So I put smudges on my prism and not all the colors show up just as they should in my life. And so I don't think about the sunlight. I don't think about the colors themselves out there in my life. I think about what's happening in me. And I pointed out many times the word prayer in Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke, is slotha, to make an adjustment. If you're working a math problem on a chalkboard and you say 2 and 2 is 5, you've got an error. You can try to live your life believing that's true, and you're going to have all kinds of problems all down the road. And you're going to argue with people, and you're going to say, you gave me the wrong change, 2 and 2 is 5. You're going to get into all kinds of things that make your life not as good as it could be. But it's not principle that needs to change. It's something in the prism. It's what I learned, 2 and 2 is 5. It's not. It doesn't matter how many times I say it. I can totally believe it, but it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it true. And I'm going to keep coming up with the wrong answers. So it's a very important thing to listen to other people. And again, that's what I like about the Fillmores, is they studied all of religion, but at some point, all religions I should say, but at some point Charles Fillmore realized that it was very confusing to listen to this teacher and that teacher. They would often contradict themselves, he said. And so he said, amidst all this babble, I will go to headquarters. And he just started meditating. They say he spent up to 6 hours a day in meditation. In other words, he determined to have a direct experience with God, to say, I love the Lord, my God, with all my heart, mind, and soul. I can do that. I can't love the Lord your God because it is an intellectual concept. But when you actually touch that presence, it becomes your God. That's the secret of Jesus. That's what made Jesus who he was. That's what made the Fillmores who they were. And I'm going to do a series at the beginning of the year about independent unity, our new name, and why we like that idea, what it means, the independence. But so much of it is that you don't just hear things. You want to find your own path. And that path is in you. It begins in the silence of your own being. It's not out there someplace in space. It is within you. It's within the prism. That's where the transformation takes place, from the universal, this infinite sea of intelligence, this is God, to the focal point. And another way to think about it is the magnifying glass that focuses the power of the sun into a single point. Very powerful. If that magnifying glass is not focused, if it's too far back, too close, it doesn't have the power to ignite something and to flame. And that's how we are. If we're not centered, if we're not focused properly, in terms of our relationship to God, life doesn't work that well. Or it may sort of work. We may warm things up a little bit, but we're never quite there. So the key is to open your mind to the quickening presence of intelligence. Your entire being is already permeated with intelligence. The functions of your body are all governed by it. And that's pretty incredible when you think of it. We take it for granted. At least until we hurt ourselves, until we catch cold or something like that, that there is so much of our body that is just, it's like running on autopilot. We don't know how to do it. And I'm glad we don't. If 8 billion of my cells said, it's time for me to divide, would you start that process, please? I would have to say, I will have to defer to a presence greater than myself, because I don't have a clue as to how that works. But if it doesn't work, we're in trouble physically. So what is that? It's a pretty miraculous thing, how the body works, how cells divide, how all of our little capillaries, all the things that are there, they know how to do what they're doing. And I don't have to get up every morning and say, would you all do your job today so I can be healthy? We can throw a wrench in that. We can do things, and we tend to do that with our food and with our lifestyles and so on. We're getting maybe a better consciousness of what all that means. But there is an intelligence that works often in spite of us, in spite of our ignorance. And that's a good thing. So if we can carry that on into our life, to say, okay, my body knows how to do that. There's something in me that knows how to do that. Well, what about my life? What about that job I'm working? What about the school I'm involved in? What about that relationship that's not going so well? Is that same intelligence also there, or does it end with me and, that's a whole other thing? Am I going to act as if there are two powers at work in this world? Or do I affirm there's but one presence, one power? And that's where we come back. That's where we make the adjustment. That's where we acknowledge there's one intelligence, and therefore, actually, if you think of a situation in your life that's not doing so well, just do what the Bible says and say, let there be light. You got chaos over here. And you're looking at that and saying, boy, that sure is chaotic. That's an affirmation too. Let there be chaos. And the universe doesn't want to disappoint you, so it continues the chaos. But if you say, let there be light, even when nothing makes sense, you're making an affirmation that aligns you with what is true at the deepest level. There is only intelligence here. There's only light. And that light, that intelligence will express through that situation and through your thinking as order. Maybe you'll see something you can do a little bit differently that will help change the way the chemistry of that whole situation is working. And it'll be solved before you know it in a very simple way. And other things require more prayer, more focus, more commitment. Because if something looks pretty bad, and it just, nothing in your whole history would say otherwise, that this is a bad situation, it may take you a while, and you may even have to call somebody to support you in your prayer. Let there be light. Let the greater wisdom and intelligence of God be seen in this situation. And you're aligning yourself with what is true. You think of the cut on the finger that knows how to heal itself. Think of the cut on the finger, just transfer that to that situation in your life. And it's no different. If you think the situation in your life is a problem, think about how that intelligence solves keeping this earth in orbit, keeping the sun where it ought to be, keeping all the stars where they should be, keeping everything, things we don't even know about. If you think you've got a big problem, if you had to run this universe, it just would be mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling to think about how it does run and how it does work. And, all of our brilliant scientists try to explain it, and every 10 years, much of that knowledge is overturned. It just gradually overturns. What they thought they understood just a short time ago, they're reevaluating. It's a pretty amazing process. You see and experience intelligence as order in your breathing, the beating of your heart, and all the many activities within the universe of your body of which you are not even aware. So that which is working in me that I can actually see and I know, can I not also project that into whatever situation is going on in my life if things aren't going so well? And you may notice that the problems that you have in life, they may be painful. They may be ugly. They may not be anything you want. But oftentimes, as they pass through your life, as they are then gone, you realize they gave you better insight. They open your mind maybe to something more. Like if you never had a problem, maybe you would never think about the things I'm talking about right now. Maybe that would never even cross your mind, never occur to you. But I think with most people that are in a way of thought that we represent, you have been given a way to think, and then you challenged it because probably some situation in your life pushed you past any answers that had for you. And you start asking deeper questions and you start looking for deeper answers. That's usually how it works. And maybe at that moment it feels like a crisis. But what's actually happening is you are looking deeper into yourself. You're looking closer to your center. You're moving closer to your center of power. And that is always a good thing. And you'll be a better person as the result of it. And that's not to say that we have to struggle to be better people. It doesn't mean that at all, because that in itself is a belief system. God isn't happy with me unless I'm suffering. There are a lot of people that think that. Poverty is a virtue. Is it? I don't think so. The only thing I ever learned when I was broke, as they used to say in Texas, so poor I couldn't even pay attention. The only thing I learned about it is I don't want to do it again. It's horrible. But as somebody said, you hit rock bottom, at least you have something to spring up from. And that's, a good way to look at it. But who wants to be in rock bottom? We're not here to suffer. We're here that we may have life and have it abundantly. That's the promise. And so if we're doing something that's shutting that off, then we have the opportunity to look. Don't look in the archives of your memory banks, your religion, your spiritual teachings even. There comes a time when you say, okay, God, if you're in me, and this is what Charles Fillmore did, if you're actually here, then I can communicate with you, or the whole thing is a fraud. That's exactly what he said. And so he spent a lot of time in meditation. And he said he began to notice that his dreams were becoming more vivid. It wasn't something that came to him consciously, like the heavens opened up and there was the answer. He'd wake up in the morning and realize he had a dream that actually was a guidance, was some level of guidance. And his dreams, he said, became more vivid all the time. And then he became quite active intuitively. And that's what happens to us. It's like meeting a person for the first time and there's something about them, you're not sure what it is. It's not quite right. You feel more than you are hearing. In other words, they're saying one thing and you're feeling something else. And we tend to want to go with what they're saying. We tend to want to take life and people at their word, at face value. But the intuition says there's something deeper here. There's something else going on. And so we begin to listen to that, because that's our true center. That's our intuitive nature. It's a very important part of our spiritual development. Emily Cady said that intellect and intuition travel together, but intuition should take the reins. And most of us have it exactly backwards. It's all the facts that we're looking at. That's how we're thinking. That's what makes us think and feel the way we do. It's the facts on the table. And we don't want to ignore facts, but we want to be aware of that inner something that's saying that's not exactly right. In other words, your life is saying to you, you should be feeling miserable about now because this is all going wrong. intuitively you can say, but there's something greater here. A greater good is now unfolding. So I don't have to go down that road. I don't have to feel depressed. I don't have to react in a way that makes me miserable. And you can do that. It's okay. You're not going to be penalized other than by the experience you're having at that moment. So you see intelligence in the flower, in your pet, in the birds, the clouds that sail across the sky. We see intelligence everywhere, so we're immersed in it. And I think of it too as a camera and the aperture in the camera. It's that device inside the lens that opens up or closes, letting more light in or letting less light. The human being would be the open aperture. It's as far open as it can get. A dog or a cat or parakeet, whatever, the aperture is not as far open. And that's not to say there's something wrong with them. It's just that we have a greater capacity for intelligence to express it. But intelligence is everywhere. It's in the earthworm. As Emma Curtis Hopkins, one of the teachers of the Fillmores, she said, this intelligence causes the earthworm to move. It's going to its greater good. Why is it moving? Because it understands there is greater good and it ought to have it. So that intelligence is operating even through the lowly earthworm. The earthworm knows exactly how to live in that environment. I don't want to know how to live in that environment. I don't want to be in that environment. A cave is close enough, and I get a little bit claustrophobic in some of those. But intelligence knows how to let that creature operate in its place perfectly, and it knows how to do it through us. And we often overlook that. I don't know what to do, great affirmation. I do know what to do, and I do it. If the earthworm knows what to do, why can't I? If they know what to do, why should I suffer? So it's like it's different levels of intelligence, but it's the same source, the same intelligence. Everything knows how to live exactly where it is. And that includes us. So let's stop saying the opposite. Okay, some affirmations. Let me say them aloud first and then invite you to join me in speaking them. The very essence of my being is intelligence. My mind is clear, my thinking is orderly. I see things in their highest relation to the whole. Now these are on the back of your program. I would highly recommend taking them and practicing this through the week. Let's say this together. The very essence of my being is intelligence. My mind is clear, my thinking is orderly. I see things in their highest relation to the whole. And that's really enough to deal with for the day, but I've got a couple more here. But that's a very powerful thought. When you're having a problem, if you'll just take this series of sentences and speak them and feel them, your whole thinking will start changing. My vision is clear. My soul is imbued with the wisdom of the universe. Together. My vision is clear. My soul is imbued with the wisdom of the universe. That is, you can't shake it off. It's part of you. You can shut it off with your thinking only, but that's it. But what that means is, okay, I can shut off with my thinking, but what can change? My thinking. I can begin to speak words that are true, that align myself again with what is true at the very deepest level. That's called prayer. Alignment. To align with what is true. In all I do, I move forward in confidence and in peace. Okay, this is really important when you're faced with something that you don't know what to do. Forget that and say something like this. In all I do, I move forward in confidence and in peace. Let's say that together. In all I do, I move forward in confidence and in peace. Okay? That concludes our series on Advent. This Tuesday night, we're going to do kind of a culmination of all of this with our candle lighting. It's a very beautiful service. And I really hope if you have not been to it, I hope you can come and share it with us. But it's something that'll make your Christmas season a very meaningful time. So thank you for coming out, and hope to see you Tuesday night.
You've been watching a talk presented at the Unity Church of Grand Junction by Reverend Doug Wator. We would like to thank everyone who joined us here today in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado, as well as those of you who are joining us online. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. Also, please feel free to share this video with anyone you think might be interested or benefit from this message. If this video brought value to your life, please consider making a donation by clicking the link below to our PayPal donation account. Thanks again so much for watching.